A teenager mocked a poor homeless man in what he thought was a harmless joke. But he had no idea that this moment would lead to devastating consequences and a lesson that would change his life forever. Let's get started. Dude, get this. He's talking to the pigeons again. The sound of gravel scraping under sneakers, a distant siren, the slow rattle of traffic above. Everything was gray under the overpass, including the laughter. Jake Howard kept his phone low but angled thumb hovering. One eye on the screen, the other on the man hunched beside a blue plastic tarp, coat sleeves bloated with air like they were still trying to hold someone inside. The air stank of wet cardboard and exhaust. A breeze snuck up from the tunnel mouth and pressed its chill into Jake's hoodie. His friends hung back half out of frame, their voices goading but distant, like a dare not quite owned. Jake filmed. The man, Mr. King, they'd later learn, didn't flinch when Jake tossed the plastic burger wrapper near his feet. He just looked down at it, then up at Jake with eyes that didn't accuse, didn't ask, just looked, like someone waiting to be remembered. Jake snorted. "He's chillin' with his McFriends," he muttered for the mic. A couple of snickers behind him. The video lasted 15 seconds. Enough for a caption, enough for a hit of dopamine. By the time Jake climbed the stairs back into daylight, the drafty gloom already seemed miles away. Their apartment 5th floor walk-up with a buzzy intercom never quite warmed up in winter. The heater coughed when it ran. There was a poster of a tree taped crookedly above the couch. Jake had drawn it in 4th grade, back when he still brought things home to show. He dropped his backpack like a body in the corner. No light in the kitchen except the fridge glow still open from where he'd grabbed a soda. Half a note from his mother fluttered on the counter, her handwriting thinner than it used to be. Late shift. Check stove before eating. Love you. He didn't check the stove. Jake's mother had 2 uniforms now. One smelled like bleach, the other like fry oil. They spoke in exchanges. "Did you eat?" "Yeah." "How was school?" "Fine." "Okay, good night." Sometimes she fell asleep, sitting up, shoes still on hand, curled around the remote like a child's. There were photos on the hallway shelf, Jake as a toddler in overalls, Jake with missing teeth and a Spider-Man cake. Dust softened the edges. He walked past them like furniture. Online, he was funny. Edgy funny. The kind that made people double tap and then share with a yo. His TikToks hit a nerve, which meant they hit a niche. He knew what made people pause, what made them flinch or laugh or comment. Bruh. He'd even gone semi-viral once, a prank in a grocery store involving a loud fart noise and a very startled old lady. Jake didn't think about her after, only watched the views rise, heart-skipping with each new burst of hearts. But something about Mr. King stuck. Not the man himself, he was background. It was that look, not hurt, not surprised, just there, present. Like someone Jake didn't want to admit he could become. At school, he was less a person and more a presence, someone people knew by screen name. He had his crew, sure. They shot videos behind the gym, joked through class, kept it light. But none of them came over. When they laughed, it was always at something, not with. Jake had started to feel the difference. That night, he edited the video. Added captions, a sound effect, sad violin over the man's blank stare. It was funny, right? He hovered over post. The glow of the screen lit only his face in the darkened room. He could hear his mother breathing through the wall, a soft rasp like sandpaper. He posted it, then shut the phone off. By morning, the video had crossed 200,000 views, but the likes came slower. The comments turned. "You think this is funny? This is someone's father, someone's brother. Hope you get humbled, kid." Jake stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. The text burned brighter than the backlight. Even the emoji reactions looked colder than usual, like they were smirking for a different reason now. At school, heads turned not in admiration, but the brittle, sidelong kind of attention that buzzes with judgment. A couple of teachers glanced his way in the hall, then looked down. His math teacher didn't call on him once. His friend Mateo said nothing at lunch, just scrolled silently beside him, not laughing at anything. That afternoon, the principal's office was colder than it should have been. The windows were shut. The counselor sat in. "We've reviewed the video," Jake, the principal said, folding his hands like he was bracing them against something slippery. "There's no ambiguity. What you did was cruel." Jake stared at a crack in the ceiling tile. The words felt theatrical, like they were reading lines from a script that had nothing to do with his actual life. "We're issuing a suspension. 1 week, and you'll be participating in a mandatory community service assignment at the Lighthouse Shelter." Jake's jaw tightened. "That's for—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Yes," the counselor said. "Unhoused individuals, people experiencing hardship." Jake's ears burned. He nodded once sharp. "This is insane. It was a joke. Maybe it's time you learned why it wasn't." His mother didn't yell. She just stared at the paper he handed her with the note from school. Her hands smelled faintly of bleach, and the corners of her eyes had deepened into small parentheses since last week. "I have to cover your hours now," she said quietly. "On top of mine." He almost said, "Sorry." He didn't. The shelter smelled like old laundry and citrus cleaner. Not dirty, just overused. The kind of clean that tries too hard. A thin woman with a braid down her back greeted him, clipboard in hand. "Jake Howard." He nodded, not offering a handshake. She didn't push. "Common area needs sweeping and wiping down. Bathrooms too. Then we rotate to sorting donations. You'll clock 4 hours a day this week." He muttered something non-committal and grabbed the broom. The handle was sticky. The people here didn't stare. That made it worse. They didn't seem to care who he was, which meant they might know. He mopped without finesse, dragging the wet cloth like it offended him. He thought about filming it, captioning it with some ironic twist. But his phone stayed in his pocket. His last post was still pinned, still rising, still rotting. On the second day he saw him. Mr. King. Same coat, same stillness, but this time seated at a folding table beneath a window, cracked just enough to let in spring air. The man had a battered notebook open, a stub of pencil working slowly left to right, line by line. Jake froze mid-wipe. The cloth hung limp in his hand. Mr. King didn't look up. He was writing as if nothing had ever happened between them. As if Jake wasn't even there. Which in some awful way was worse than being confronted. Jake took a step forward, then stopped. The air shifted barely, but enough to tighten his throat. There was a tremor in Mr. King's hand as he wrote, but the lines were steady, composed, like someone copying scripture or memory. Jake turned back to the table he was cleaning. He scrubbed harder now, as if by polishing the surface he could wipe the image from his mind, but the pencil kept scratching. Later, when he dumped the rags in the janitor's sink, his fingers smelled like lemon and something faintly sour like regret trying to ferment. He rinsed them twice. That night, Jake didn't open TikTok. Not because he was ashamed. He wasn't sure what to call the feeling. He thought of the notebook. The way Mr. King held it like it was something fragile, maybe the only thing he still owned. The man's quiet dignity, unshaken, unperformed, gnawed at something Jake hadn't named yet. He told himself it was just a look, just a fluke. Each day after Jake found his eyes pulled toward Mr. King like a compass hand tugged from its true north. He told himself it was curiosity, that he just wanted to see if the man would do something weird, talk to the walls, argue with ghosts. Something to confirm the comfort of Jake's old judgment. Crazy, pathetic, forgettable. But Mr. King mostly just wrote. And when he spoke, it wasn't to himself, it was with words chosen like stones in a riverbed, smoothed placed. "You ever notice," he said one afternoon, looking not at Jake but out the open window, "how silence has a shape to it? It swells like water behind glass. Most folks can't sit in it long enough to hear what it's holding." Jake had paused mid-mop. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't have something to say, but because he did, and it scared him. The next day, Jake arrived early. The mop bucket hadn't even been filled. Mr. King was already there, pencil poised, lips moving as if in private rehearsal. Then he spoke low but sure to no one in particular. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Creeps in this petty pace from day to day. Jake turned slowly. The words pricked at something faintly familiar. A school memory, maybe. Something read aloud in a classroom where he wasn't really listening. Mr. King's voice deepened as he continued, soft and strange, like someone conjuring a ghost rather than reciting lines. "And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out brief candle." Jake stood there, the mop forgotten. There was no drama in Mr. King's delivery, no flourish, just clarity. Grief folded into rhythm. A voice that once belonged at the front of a room. "You know Shakespeare?" Jake asked a little too quickly. Mr. King looked up then, met his eyes clear as cold water. "I used to teach 10th grade English." The silence afterward stretched out, taut and quiet. Jake shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how childish he sounded next to that calm. "Seriously?" Mr. King nodded, one side of his mouth twitching upward. Not quite a smile. That night, Jake stayed after school and asked his English teacher, Ms. Alston, if she'd ever heard of a Daryl King. Her brow furrowed. "Where'd you get that name?" He shrugged. "Just heard it somewhere." She typed something into her laptop, paused, then turned the screen toward him. A newspaper article 10 years old. "Beloved English teacher mourns wife's death, placed on extended leave." A photo, the same eyes younger, less hollow. Jake read the whole piece in silence. Mr. King had once run the school's literary magazine. He'd organized community readings, mentored dozens. After his wife died in a hit and run, something had cracked. He never returned. The district quietly replaced him. No follow-up, no closure. Another link led to a forum post by a former student. "Mr. King was the only teacher who ever made me believe I wasn't stupid. He used to say poems are how the soul clears its throat." Jake stared at those words a long time. The next morning at the shelter, he saw Mr. King adjusting the notebook under his elbow, moving slow like a man carrying something sacred. Jake approached. "You really taught Mr. King didn't look up." "Once." Jake waited. The silence came again, shaped, swelling. "Why'd you stop?" Mr. King tapped the pencil once gently against the table's edge. "I lost the story I was in," he said simply. "And the system doesn't hold pages for people who fall out of frame." Jake swallowed. The words lodged somewhere behind his sternum. He wanted to apologize, but the shape of that word didn't fit in his mouth yet. That night he watched the video again. The one with the violin music. The rapper. The look. It played differently now. He paused it on Mr. King's face. The stillness. Not confused. Not afraid. Just waiting. As if the world had already done its worst. Jake didn't cry. That would have felt like too much. But something in him collapsed inward quiet as a building emptied by time. Not guilt for being caught. Something harder, something new. Responsibility. Not for what the world thought of him, but for what he'd done, and who he'd done it to. The school project started as an assignment, a half-hearted idea to balance the scales. But the more Jake wrote, the less it felt like a redemption arc. It felt like witness. He titled it, Not Invisible, One Man's Story of Silence and Survival. Mr. King didn't know about the project, not at first. Jake wanted to get the facts right before offering them back to the man who'd been made faceless. He started with the librarian at the old public branch, the one next to the abandoned laundromat. Ms. Frey still remembered him. Daryl, she said, voice lighting like a struck match. He used to bring in stacks of poetry books, taught me what a villanelle was, said it was a trapdoor form meant to trick grief into speaking. She hadn't seen him in years. Her smile faded like ink left in sunlight. Then Jake tracked down a former student, Elena Morales, now a college sophomore. She met him at a coffee shop with chipped mugs and no Wi-Fi. Mr. King used to wear these ridiculous suspenders, she said, eyes softening with memory. We thought he was ancient, like 35. But when he read Neruda, you couldn't blink. It was like he cracked your chest open and said, "See, this is what living costs." She paused. When his wife died, he didn't talk about it. He just got quieter. Then one day he stopped coming. She handed Jake a folded paper. A poem, Mr. King had once written on the back of a quiz, "Even silence has syntax." Jake wrote it all down meticulously, reverently. Each name became a thread, each memory a stitch. The third was a retired teacher, Mr. Halverson, who now volunteered at the food pantry on 9th. Daryl was the kind of man who believed kids could survive anything if someone taught them how to name what they felt, he said. But the system doesn't love poets, especially not grieving ones. He looked at Jake then. "Why do you care?" Jake's throat tightened. "Because I didn't. And it cost him." Back home, Jake deleted TikTok, then Instagram, then the backup account. Each app faded from his phone like a ghost finally leaving. At first, his fingers twitched, reaching for muscle memory. But with time, the silence between notifications became a kind of balm. He kept only the camera, not for selfies, not for skits, but for the way light hit Mr. King's profile when he wrote in the mornings, for the half smile he gave when a line came out clean, for the chipped coffee mug on the shelter counter, and the way condensation ran down like a slow clock. Mr. King let Jake sit closer now. Most days he wrote in silence, but sometimes if the weather was right or the night had been kind, he'd let Jake copy the words into a second notebook. Jake's handwriting had changed. Slower, neater, less performed. One morning, Mr. King whispered almost to himself, "Words are where we go when the world forgets our face." Jake nodded. "Then we'll write your face back in." Mr. King chuckled low. "That's good, boy. That's good." But not every day was like that. Some days, Mr. King wandered the room lost in corners. Other days, he sat hunched, unmoving, his gaze caught on something behind his own eyes. Jake didn't force conversation. He learned the rhythm of someone healing in circles, not lines. He learned that presence wasn't always noisy. Sometimes it was sitting beside someone while they said nothing and meaning it. Jake started taking photos, not of Mr. King directly, but of the world he occupied. The rust stain under the window, the way the curtains moved when someone passed, the half-eaten apple left on the bench catching morning light. He printed them on glossy paper and taped them inside a second notebook. Each photo a heartbeat, each page a frame of dignity. One day he handed the book to Mr. King. The man turned each page with the care of someone leafing through memory. When he reached the end, he didn't speak, just placed his hand over the cover and let it rest there. Jake didn't need words. The silence had its own syntax. That night, Jake walked home differently, slower, not checking his reflection in windows, not adjusting his hoodie for angles. Instead, he watched. A woman feeding pigeons from a wrinkled paper bag. A boy carrying a broken umbrella like a flag. A man with paint on his hands waiting at the crosswalk with his eyes closed. He lifted the camera, framed them gently. They were all stories, Jake realized. Not content, not jokes, just people. And maybe, just maybe, he was one of them again. Everything started with the smell of garlic. Jake hadn't planned to cook, he barely knew how. But his mother came home earlier than usual, her shoulders drawn tight, her eyes ringed with fatigue. For once, he didn't retreat to his room. Instead, he stood beside her in the cramped kitchen, fumbling with the cutting board, watching the way her fingers moved over the knife like muscle memory. The rice cooker hissed softly in the corner. Steam curled against the ceiling. "You ever make this before?" he asked. His mother arched a brow. "You think this food just appears?" Jake half smiled. "Fair." There was a beat of silence. Then, unprompted, she said, "In '09, I used to make this in the back seat of a Honda, on a camp stove. You had just turned 3. He paused mid-stir. She didn't meet his eyes, just kept dicing green onions, her movements steady. "That winter was cold. I wrapped you in every sweater I owned, parked near a church because it felt safer. The heater didn't work right. I used to tell you stories to keep your teeth from chattering." Jake's hands stilled. "I don't remember that," he said, voice soft. "You weren't supposed to." That night they talked, not about bills or grades or curfews, but about her. About how she crossed the ocean at 22 with a visa she barely understood and a suitcase that broke in transit. How she lost 3 jobs in 1 year. How she ate canned peaches for weeks because they were cheap and sweet and reminded her of home. Jake listened the way he'd learned to at the shelter, not waiting to reply, just receiving. He saw her then, not as the mom who was always tired, but as a woman who had clawed her way through something brutal quietly, without applause. He reached across the table, covered her hand with his. "Thank you," he said. She looked at him like she wasn't sure who he was, then nodded once, as if giving permission for something to finally start. At the shelter the next day, Mr. King handed over his notebook with a wordless nod. Jake copied the entry carefully, the soft scratch of pen on paper filling the quiet like rain on glass. Halfway down the page, he paused. "We become architecture stoops, corners, benches, part of the scenery. Nobody names. Eyes slide past, feet skirt edges. We are the city's ghost limbs moving without witness." The words coiled in Jake's chest. He had spent years online begging to be seen, curating laughs, baiting attention. But he had also felt invisible, especially in that apartment walking through a house where no one spoke more than 5 words a day. Not homeless, but not quite whole either. The ache, though different, was familiar. He looked up. Mr. King sat quietly sipping from a chipped mug. "You ever feel like that?" Jake asked. Mr. King's smile was faint. "Every day. Until someone doesn't let you disappear." That night, Jake sat at his desk surrounded by printouts, scribbled notes, and fading photos. He spread them across the floor like puzzle pieces, the librarian's memory, Elena's quote, the faded article, Mr. King's poems, and in the center that line about becoming scenery. His phone buzzed, a friend asking why he hadn't posted in weeks. He muted the screen, The project wasn't extra credit anymore. It wasn't even about making amends. It was something else now, a reckoning, a bridge, a record of someone who had mattered deeply and been forgotten too easily. The stories didn't stop with Mr. King. They came to Jake slowly, like leaves drifting onto a pond, quiet, layered, impossible to ignore. A woman with sharp eyes and a limp who'd once been a pediatric nurse until grief and panic attacks drove her from the ER to the shelter. A veteran who flinched at slamming doors and apologized to light bulbs when they flickered. A boy not much older than Jake Clean now for 4 months, who kept pictures of his younger sister folded in his wallet like a talisman. Jake listened and wrote. Each voice added to the shape of the thing he was building, not a paper, not even a story, but a small defiance against erasure. They weren't just victims. They were architects of survival, not ornaments for pity, but people with backbones and battlefields. It was during one of their morning transcription sessions that Jake found it. Mr. King had dozed off, chin resting on his fist, the soft wheeze of sleep steady as a metronome. Jake turned the pages, gently organizing the newer drafts from the brittle curling ones. A sealed envelope slipped out. No stamp, just a name written in tight, angular script, Dr. Colleen Renshaw. Jake stared at it. Something about the name stirred a memory, one of the articles maybe. He unfolded the letter. Inside paragraphs, neat, precise, and sharp-edged. It wasn't a love letter or a journal entry. It was testimony. Mr. King had written in painful detail about retaliation by the former principal at his school, a man who had been quietly dismissed 2 years later for unrelated misconduct. Mr. King had filed complaints, pursued a case, but was eventually placed on administrative leave and quietly let go with no public statement. They hadn't just forgotten him, they'd silenced him. Jake felt his stomach knot. He refolded the letter and slipped it into his own notebook. Mr. King didn't stir. That evening, Jake overheard something he wasn't meant to. 2 staff members at the shelter speaking just outside the utility room. One of them was the program liaison, Rachel, the woman who'd first welcomed him. "He's declining," she said. "Last week he wandered off again." "Yeah, but is he dangerous?" "No, but unregulated. We've flagged him before. This time I sent a referral. They'll pick him up Friday morning, 72-hour hold, maybe longer. He won't fight it. He's tired." Jake pressed his back against the wall, heart pounding. They were sending Mr. King away, not to help, to remove. That night, Jake didn't sleep. He watched the city's lights blink through the blinds and thought of all the times people had vanished without protest, without audience. The decision came quietly, but with weight. The next day, after Mr. King's morning tea, Jake knelt by the table. "We need to go," he said. Mr. King blinked. "Where? Somewhere they won't find you. Somewhere you get to stay whole." Mr. King's gaze lingered. "You understand what you're doing?" Jake nodded. "For once, yeah." They left with only a backpack and 2 notebooks. The library had been shut for years. A squat brick building with ivy creeping into its cracks, the windows thick with dust. But the back door still worked if you lifted the hinge and twisted twice. Mr. King stepped inside like a man walking through memory. There was an old reading room with stained carpet and broken blinds, but still enough light in the morning to write by. They made beds from piled coats, used bottled water and takeout. Jake smuggled in with his allowance. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. Free. Mr. King spent the first day napping under a collapsed bookshelf. The second day, he wrote again. Jake worked by flashlight editing the final version of his project. He stripped it of sentimentality, replaced any language that softened reality. He included the letter, the photo evidence. the interviews. Then he added a closing line. If we only see people through the screen, we will never hear their silence. And silence is where dignity begins. The school was holding a student forum on community impact next week. Jake had registered to speak. He knew the risks. Suspension, legal blowback, maybe worse. But he also knew something else now. The cost of staying quiet. And he was done paying it. Jake's name was last on the speaker list. He stood backstage, notes shaking slightly in his hand, though not from fear. From urgency. From the weight of too many truths carried too long. The youth forum had drawn a modest crowd. Students, teachers, parents, a few local reporters. The topic was social change through student voices. Jake had timed his presentation to 13 minutes every second, etched with conviction. The truth about Mr. King, the letter, the shelter, the invisible lines of dignity crossed every day in plain sight. He began calmly, no theatrics, just the facts. But 2 minutes in, the moderator stirred. Jake interrupted, stepping to the podium, voice tight behind a smile. We ask that you stay on topic and refrain from unfounded accusations. This isn't the venue for Jake didn't flinch. Everything I'm saying is documented. You just didn't read far enough. A ripple of murmurs rolled through the auditorium. The moderator pressed on. This is becoming inappropriate. We're ending your presentation here. Jake's mic was cut. A guard stepped lightly toward the stage as if to remind him who the room belonged to. Jake stood frozen, his mouth still open around a sentence that would never finish. For a moment it felt like all the silence he'd studied had turned inward. A trap door swinging shut. Then from the back row came the scrape of a chair. A figure rose, older, slower than the rest, but walking steadily. A hush fell over the room as Mr. King moved down the aisle, each step careful but certain. He climbed the stage, unaided eyes fixed on the mic. Someone fumbled to switch it back on. The room held its breath. Mr. King's voice, when it came, was quiet, but not weak. He didn't defend Jake, didn't explain. He simply opened his notebook, thumbed to a page, and read, "We do not ask to be rescued. We ask to be seen, to be named, not numbered, to be known not by scars, but by songs we still carry. When the world stops listening." Silence blanketed the auditorium, thick, reverent, unblinking. And then the applause came, not polite, not obligatory. It swelled like something breaking loose. Some students stood. A few teachers clapped with their eyes closed. Jake stood behind Mr. King, hands shaking again, but for a different reason. Not fear, recognition. The aftermath came swiftly. Jake was called into the principal's office. Another warning on his record. He was told the forum was not a stage for political crusades. But outside that office, a different current stirred. Miss Alston, his English teacher, started a petition demanding the district reopen the case of Darrell King and formally acknowledge the mishandling. Within days, over 500 students and parents signed it. Elena Morales organized a virtual fundraiser for the shelter. Local news picked up the story after a student journalist posted a clip from the forum. Then the email came. An independent nonprofit specializing in transitional housing for displaced educators reached out to Mr. King. They offered him a place in a long-term creative residency program, with health care, with dignity. Jake cried when he read it. Mr. King just folded the letter and said, "About time someone rewrote my ending." Weeks later, the old library smelled of paint and hope. Students volunteered. Neighbors donated books. A community group helped fix the roof. And one corner was dedicated entirely to writing a table, 2 chairs, notebooks stacked like kindling. Jake and Mr. King returned each day. They called it Room of Return. Jake typed up every poem Mr. King had kept. He laid them out carefully, chose a title with him, See Me, Read Me. Then they launched the campaign. Small prints, pay what you can, proceeds to fund writing supplies for those living without a fixed address. It wasn't just a fundraiser. It was a map back into the world. It was a Sunday late March. The air was still winter cold, but the sun pushed through in patches, warming the cement in slow, golden breaths. Jake sat under the overpass, legs crossed, notebook in lap. No camera, no signal. Just the low hum of traffic above and the sound of pages turning. The box beside him was hand-painted, chipped at the corners. Whispers from the margin read the sign in black acrylic. Inside were a dozen thin poetry books. Mr. King's words, now bound, now real. People could take one, leave one, read, and pass it on. Jake had come back to the place he once mocked, but now he stayed to listen. He flipped through a copy, fingers tracing familiar lines. The bridge's shadow fell across his shoulder like a soft hand. A pair of sneakers crunched nearby. A boy around his age, hood-up headphones dangling, slowed as he passed. The boy glanced at the box, then at Jake. Recognition flickered in his expression. Not admiration. Something else. "You still pretending to care?" he asked. "Or is this your new TikTok bit?" Jake looked up, calm. The boy waited, smirking like he expected a comeback. Jake just smiled. Not wide, not bitter. "Have a good day," he said simply. The boy scoffed and kept walking. Jake didn't watch him go. He didn't need to win anymore. Mr. King now lived in a modest studio unit near the community center. There were days he remembered everything and days he forgot Jake's name. But he was safe. He had books beside his bed, warm socks, a lock on the door, and a nurse who called him Mr. King, not just client. Sometimes he still recited poems in his sleep. Jake visited twice a week. They worked slowly, organizing drafts, retyping stanzas. There were mornings when Mr. King's hands shook too much to write, so Jake held the pen and let him dictate. There would be no miracle recovery, no perfect closure. But there was poetry, and presence, and permanence now in print. Jake turned to the final page of the book, the last poem. It ended like all of Mr. King's pieces with no punctuation, just space. "I do not need to be saved. I only need to be seen." Jake read it twice. Then a third time, lips moving silently. Wind rattled the pages. Somewhere above, a car horn blared, distant and indifferent. Jake closed the book. He let the silence settle. Then he leaned back against the concrete and closed his eyes, not to forget, but to carry it in quiet. Not everything needed an audience. Some truths just needed to live. The story of Jake and Mr. King is a powerful exploration of transformation, dignity, and the quiet resilience of those living at society's edges. What makes Jake's journey so compelling is not just his fall and redemption, but the depth of emotional truth that unfolds as he learns to see, not just look. At first, Jake is driven by attention and performance, trapped in the superficiality of social media. But through his encounters with Mr. King and others at the shelter, he gradually unlearns judgment and relearns empathy. What moves the reader most is the way dignity is reclaimed, not through grand gestures, but through presence, listening, and bearing witness. Jake's growth is subtle but profound. He goes from exploiting someone's vulnerability to becoming its quiet guardian. The story doesn't offer a perfect ending, but it gives us something deeper, a sense of meaning of voices once silenced, now echoing with purpose. The human lesson is clear. Real connection begins when we stop performing and start listening. Everyone carries an unseen story. To recognize someone's humanity is not to rescue them, but to affirm that they matter, that they are seen. And sometimes that is enough to change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.